On many episodes of the GeoTrek podcast, we've had guests talk about extreme weather events that have inflicted widespread fatalities despite accurate weather forecasts. On this episode of the podcast, Shel Winkley, a weather and climate engagement specialist at Climate Central, talks about the importance of climate and weather communications to help prepare people for what may come their way. Hey everyone, I'm Hurricane Hal, host of the GeoTrek podcast. On the GeoTrek podcast, we explore the world to bring you stories about extreme weather and natural disasters not covered by the mainstream media. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to the GeoTrek podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Your support of the podcast ensures many more episodes of the GeoTrek podcast in the future. Without further introduction, let's jump into this episode with Shel Winkley. Shel, thank you so much for taking time to come on the GeoTrek podcast.
No, thank you for inviting us and letting us come hang out and chat for a bit.
Shel, share with us about this amazing work you and your team are doing at Climate Central, a little bit about your professional life right now.
Yeah, so if you're unfamiliar with Climate Central, we are a nonprofit, non-advocacy group of scientists and communicators. So our job really is to take the data and the science around weather and climate change. That's kind of the hard part, right? Crunching it all together, doing the science, but then we want to simplify it. We want to localize it. We want to give it to somebody like you, Hal, who can, really tell the stories around that data, that science, and the climate change impacts that are happening in the place that you are from, right? You know it better than we do. So we can do the math and all that stuff that comes together, but we give it to storytellers, meteorologists, journalists, content creators, whoever it might be that wants to tell the story and really help us understand how our changing climate is impacting our day-to-day life.
That's amazing. So, and that seems so applicable. It almost seems like applied climate, but not only with the analysis, but also a lot of the storytelling and communication.
Right. And, I went to a conference just a couple weeks ago, the National Weather Association annual conference. And this was one of the big things we talked about. Like, weather stories are climate stories, right? Like, when you look at the weather, climate plays a part of that. We talk about it all the time when we look at the 30-year averages, or we talk about a record high, right? So we can really understand, is this just a wacky weather day? Is this just a weird temperature? Because that happens, that's weather. That is natural variability. Or is there a fingerprint here? Can we really understand what's happening and how humans have kind of altered the way the weather? How have we turned things from natural to a bit more unnatural? And then what do we do about it, right? Like, how do we apply this into our communities? How do we apply this into our state? How do we apply this globally? What can we do together to make this more tangible and more understandable?
Shel, I remember the first time I met you, I'm like, man, this guy is passionate about weather and climate. This isn't just a job. This is like a calling. It's a passion. Tell our listeners a little bit about your path into this profession. I mean, what was your professional path? What was your education and academic path as well?
Yeah, so, I grew up, first of all, way back when I was just a little tiny tyke shell. I was growing up in Lubbock, Texas, which, has seen its fair share of severe weather. So I was that kid, everyone has these stories of like, oh, I went through this big storm and that's why I wanted to be a meteorologist. No, I was terrified. Like, I envisioned a tornado just like ripping me out of my home. So anytime there was severe weather, the meteorologist's name was John Robinson. He's still on TV in Lubbock, Texas today. But it was me and him. I'd have him on the TV. I'd pull out our family atlas and I would try to track the storms with him. But I wanted to learn why. Like, that was my way of like coping with this fear, was just going to the library and checking out books. And eventually that turned into a passion. So time to pick a college. My dad wouldn't let me just go to college as a general studies major because he knew exactly what would happen. I would go and just waste my time. So I picked Texas A&M University. We got a great meteorology program here. Spent 4 years there. I interned. I had the great opportunity to intern at the local TV station, KBTX. And I realized that what I wanted to do was talk about the weather, to help people make the connection of what was happening outside their windows and their doors and what their days were going to be. And so I interned there. And then when I graduated, I moved to Amarillo, Texas, back up into the Texas Panhandle. I spent 2 years and some change there as the weekend meteorologist and lead storm chaser. So I got to be the one first out the door to go chase down some storms and hail. There was a week where I 3 days in a row, we went storm chasing. 3 days in a row, I came back with some sort of busted window because I just punched hail cores, right? And eventually they were like, we're going to bench you for a bit. We can't afford to keep up with your chasing habits.
You were just shredding up these cars, huh, with hail, right?
How are you going to know if you don't go in, right? So, in 2009, I moved back to Bryan College Station. I was the morning meteorologist at KBTX. So I was coming home to the station that kind of taught me everything I knew. And then in 13, 14, I became chief meteorologist, and then I spent about almost 15 years at KBTX talking to the good folks of the Brazos Valley.
Shel, talk to us that transition from studying meteorology and then to getting into broadcast meteorology. I mean, was that an easy transition? Because it's really, you have to have the intellectual and educational background, but now all of a sudden you have to communicate with a broad audience, right?
And, even more so now, because as a you go and you study meteorology, you're not studying how to be a graphic designer, which you have to do to put those graphics on TV. You're not studying how to be a communicator, right? Because you're just learning a bunch of equations. So that's where those internship really paid off for me, because I got a chance to forecast. I think, Texas A&M has done a great job of restructuring the program. But when I was there wasn't a lot of emphasis on the forecasting element. It was just the understanding why weather does what weather does. But yes, it is a skill that I have grown into in being a weather communicator. And it's one that I'm not perfect at, and I can continue to grow at every single day. But that's one of my biggest passions. I got to teach the broadcast meteorology course at Texas A&M, and try to help. Yeah, I always told them, I was like, even if you're not going into TV, into broadcast, you're going to have to talk about the weather. Look, I am not I will admit to you, I am not the smartest meteorologist out there by far. But I can tell you about the weather. And I think that's the thing I always say, is that you can create the best absolute spot on forecast, but if you can't relate it to the person who needs to take in that information, then it's a wasted forecast. And so that's something that we can always do as an enterprise together, is just be better. Honestly, it's a thing that we can do as just a human race. It's just be better communicators, especially when it comes to the weather, and when it comes to weather that matters the most, impactful weather.
Yeah, Shel, and we've seen in recent years, and we've had a few different podcast guests talk about forecasts that are spot on, but there's still a large loss of life because there was a breakdown in communication or a breakdown in perception, or even just people never heard the message, right?
Right, and it really comes down to, for me, that last mile of communication. Look at the Texas floods, from the 4th of July weekend. It was that last mile bit that we really needed to save lives. And that's a hard one to look back at and try to play, Monday morning quarterback on. But yeah, the communication is key, and especially in this day and age where you've got a lot of things being thrown at you, it's harder and harder to communicate and to get people's attention, especially when it really matters.
Shel, so you're really talking about this really important interface between weather and communication. And I wanted to ask you, as a weather and climate engagement specialist, I mean, you definitely have focused a lot of your work and your teaching on clear communication and communicating weather. What are one or two main insights you can give our audience about how to clearly communicate weather information?
Yeah, so one is that people are busy. So tell me what I need to know. I think that's really important. I have a great friend, his name's Tim Heller. He was a former broadcaster in the Houston area, but he really believes, and I do too, this thing called the essential message. What is the essential message of the day? What is the essential message of what you're trying to say? So it may be a storm that you have your eye on, or something cool that's happening in another part of the country, but when it comes to the people that you're talking to, in this case, let's say viewers on TV, what do they need to know? Not what do you want to talk about? What do they need to know? And that is, I think, the biggest part of it all is just understanding that, because we're busy. We're talking to a mom who's juggling a couple of kids, and she's trying to get lunches made and get them to school and make sure that they're, they've got all the clothes on that they need to, or whatever it might be. So you've got to meet people where they are, and you have to help them really just relate it to what they are going to be doing on a day-to-day basis.
Shel, that's such an important point. I mean, a lot of times there's just an overabundance of information out there, right? But like you said, people are busy. They have just a moment to get that big picture. And if we don't make that concise for them, right, the message is going to be lost.
Right. And so to bring that back to, climate change information, we know that it's a global problem. We have to work on it as a human race. And we know that, not to discredit this at all, but we know that polar bears are suffering. But as a person in I don't know, Oklahoma City. Like you don't see that every day. You see what you're experiencing there in Oklahoma. You're experiencing wherever you're experiencing weather. The way that we know that people experience climate change is through extreme weather, either what's happening outside or what they're seeing on their phones. So it's really helping from weather, from climate, whatever it might be, helping people understand what's happening for them, let them grasp that, and then we can widen out the experience.
Shel, how do you get a pulse on what is important to people? I mean, is there social science research being done on that? Is there trial and error? Like, do you put messages out there and then see what kind of feedback you get? I mean, what are some ideas on that?
Yeah, a lot of trial and error. And I know that like walking into social media in 2025 isn't the most fun place to be. You know, like I remember the days of Twitter when Twitter was Twitter and it was so much fun, like the fail whale and all that stuff. Like that was fun. I would say though, like having those conversations, that's one thing I never will shy away from. Even the emails that I would get from people who just didn't like the way I was doing weather, or if I brought in a climate change connection or whatever it might be. If somebody is reaching out to you via social media, via email, they have questions. They want to have a conversation most of the time. Not everybody, but most of them do, right? So, and that's just their way of opening the door, and it may not be the softest approach when they do so, but you really have to listen to what others want. That's why I love doing things like Facebook Lives or anything that's a live event, or, you know, like it really gives you a chance to understand what people want to know. When we used to cover severe weather, you could do it where you just pop on someone's TV, but I also really love doing it on Facebook, because then I could see the questions that were coming in and I could reroute the way I'm tracking a storm, because I can understand what people are experiencing. Or someone's maybe saying, hey, we're at this big event at this school, what time is it coming? And that gives me the cue to say, okay, that's really important. So that's in the moment, but yeah, it's just really listening to what people are talking about to help understand like how it's going to, that message is going to fit into their lives.
Yeah, Shel, for better or worse, social media is interactive, right? And we get that instant feedback. There have been times I'm doing a forecast and I'm getting all these questions about something I didn't even think of addressing or I forgot to address, right? And we can circle back with people because there's this feedback mechanism.
And it goes back to that, what do they need to know versus what do you think they need to know, or what are you interested in, right? Like it really helps you ground you in understanding what people care about. And sometimes it's something that's really dumb and sometimes it's something that's really important, but it really just helps frame the messaging.
Well, you're making a good point. If you know where they're coming from, if you're standing in their shoes, knowing their needs, all of a sudden you can tailor a message or even forecast something that's important to them, whereas it might not be what the academic weather gurus are talking about the topic of the day, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Shel, I wanted to ask too, I mean, you mentioned this concept of climate change and about a lot of times that's seen through the extremes. I know you and your team at Climate Central are doing a tremendous amount of research on climate change attribution. I mean, what does that mean and why is that so important?
Yeah, okay, so going back, you know, it used to always, one thing is always remember is that like weather is weather and climate is climate, right? There's a difference there. One's long-term trends and one's the day-to-day. And it used to be said that you couldn't say that one event or one day of unusual temperatures was climate change, but that has now changed in itself. The science, attribution science, helps us really understand and put a fingerprint on it. So the way that we do it here at Climate Central is through a tool that we call the Climate Shift Index. And so essentially what we're doing is a lot with temperatures, land temperatures, sea surface temperatures, and then that can inform other things that we understand, which we know that hurricanes are driven by ocean warmth. So if we can understand the human contribution of that sea surface temperature, then we can then translate that science into the intensity of a hurricane. How much more intense was it? How much more wind was added? And so the way that we do it, just some of the like background science of how this works is essentially we run over 20 climate and weather models, and we're doing it 2 times through. The first time through, we're adding all of the historical carbon emissions that humans have put into the atmosphere since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And then we'll run those same models again, but this time we're going to do it without that human contribution of carbon pollution. And when we look at those side by side, we can then create a ratio. And that ratio helps us understand, okay, this weird temperature that you experienced today, or this ocean warmth that is driving a hurricane, you know, doesn't mean it's going to happen every day at this spot on this exact day. But we also understand that with the current warming that we have in place at 1.3 degrees Celsius, and with future warming, this temperature is going to be this much more likely because of climate change. And so that's great. But again, what do you do with that, right? So that's how you help people make that connection. If it's, hey, you don't like your Christmas day feeling warm, you don't like an 80-degree Christmas day. Okay, well, it doesn't mean that every December 25th is going to be this warm, but we know that a temperature like this is now however many times more likely because of climate change, and it's something that we have to look at as we go into the future.
So will a lot of that climate change attribution work relate to extreme events like a heat wave, a flood, things like this, to say this is what proportion of that was driven by climate change?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great work being done around attribution. Our part is just one contribution to that. There's a great organization of international scientists called the World Weather Attribution. And so what they do is they look at big events, think about the Kentucky and Tennessee floods or Helene and Milton last year. And so what we can do with the science is say, okay, let's take Helene, for instance. Like a hurricane's going to hurricane, right? Like Helene was always going to be a hurricane no matter what. But we understand how much more rain was added because of climate change, how much more wind was added because of climate change. We can look at those 2-day and the 3-day rainfall and understand the percentage of the rainfall that was added. But what I really love about what attribution science can do, because once the storm is over, the devastation's there, the cleanup is beginning, we're looking at communities. But what it can do is then inform us, okay, again, we're at this warming. We continue to warm the planet to, let's say, 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average. We know that another storm like Helene can then, at that future warming will add another this much percentage of wind and rain. And so what that helps us do is a couple things. One, it tells us that extreme weather is, yes, becoming more extreme because of climate change. But two, it really helps us try to mitigate that weather, understand what we're building our communities to be more resilient towards, right? It's not just a regular hurricane. Now we've got to build for stronger hurricanes or rainier hurricanes or windier ones. And that really helps us go forward in our communities in order to make us stronger. Because, you're not going to get everybody to move away from a coast, right? So this helps us, it informs us of how we can continue to build our communities better.
Shel, I could see this being really valuable for tying into frequency analysis, right? That high water mark that you say, well, today that high water mark's happening every 50 years, but in the life of a 30-year mortgage, that might happen every 20 years or something. I could see that being very useful for community planning, also for a risk analysis, insurance. There'd be a lot of applications for that.
Lots of applications there. And, it really helps you as a homeowner understand, like we talk about this all the time, but we just know that rain events are becoming more intense. And so the 100-year floodplain may not be what we should be judging, if you need flood insurance for instead anymore. So it really, it just helps you get more information. If we can get more information and plug that in and really understand what we're up against, doesn't mean that it's going to happen now, but we know that there is the potential that it could happen, and that events like a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 year storm, they may not be at that frequency anymore. They could be, more likely.
Shel, I have to ask you, in your work with climate change attribution, is there a type of hazard or phenomenon that as you got into this research, you're like, wow, this is going to be a bigger deal than I realized?
Yeah, yes. So a lot of it, I wish that we paid attention more to heat. And that's the story. That's the way that climate change is going to impact us, is through heat. But that's like a slow moving thing, right? Like you feel the heat at the beginning of the summer, but then you kind of get used to it. And then you're like, oh, this heat's kind of hanging on a little longer. This really helps us put a grasp on that. But it's not something like a hurricane or a severe storm or a flood, right? Because that catches your attention, and the visuals are just so in your face that you're like, oh, that's a big deal. Versus like someone sweating in Phoenix because Phoenix is hot, but we know that it's getting hotter. I think that's really interesting. And there's a lot of different work, right? We can use attribution to understand how many more, unfortunately, like fatalities come from a heat event because of climate change that wouldn't have happened in a world without that extra carbon pollution. So really applying it to the different ways and tracing back the timeline of that carbon pollution really helps us understand why and how we got here.
Shel, I'm really glad you mentioned heat. It's one of these almost invisible hazards. Like, how do you, in a videographic sense, show a heat wave impacting people? It's really hard compared to a hurricane or a blizzard or a tornado. When a tornado is tearing apart a house, you're like, wow, that's extreme. People sweltering and then having heat-related sickness at night in an unconditioned house in Europe or something. It's hard to tell that story. It's hard to really capture that story, right? But I've heard heat is really one of the main emerging areas of heat related or just weather related fatalities and sicknesses.
Yeah, well, you got to overcome a couple different things there. One, you've got to overcome just the perception, of like, oh, it's summer, it's supposed to be hot. Well, yes, no one's arguing that, but like, it's not supposed to be this hot. Las Vegas isn't supposed to hit 120, whatever, even in the desert, right? Like, so one of the things that, back to communication on that, we've really done a lot of work on just as a news and storytellers together is, when you tell those heat stories, we have to stop showing video of people eating ice cream or playing at a splash pad. Yes, that's how they are cooling down, but we really need to show people how this is impacting those that don't get a chance. Like you and I, I don't know everything that you do, Hal, but like right now we're both, I assume, in air conditioned places, right? We have the luxury of being cool off on a hot day. But when you drive around and you see somebody working on a roof or a construction worker or the first responders that have to come to you when you have heat exhaustion. So those are the videos and those are the visuals that we need to show to remind people that, yes, you might have a chance to be comfortable, but not everybody does. And when it comes to heat, we know that it doesn't impact everybody equally. We know climate change doesn't impact everybody equally. Air conditioning is great. It's kind of taken away our ability to understand the impacts of climate change, but not everybody can afford to run the air conditioner all day long. And some people have to make the choice. Do we run the AC and keep the house cool? Or do we put food on the table? Do we pay rent and keep this roof over our head? So it just really helps us understand that while we may not have the biggest impacts and we're comfortable, it doesn't necessarily mean our neighbors are.
Shel, I mean, great insights there on the social impacts of this as well. A lot that can be said about this, and I'm so happy that you and your team are addressing this. Shel, we're at that time of the GeoTrek podcast where we get into our Weathered Wisdom segment. We're going to ask you about a weather event that left such an impression on you, you'll never forget it. Could be something that impacted you personally or professionally, but something either surprising or just so high magnitude that you will never forget this weather event. Shel, what is your weathered wisdom?
Okay, so I was thinking about this pretty hard, right? So I covered Hurricane Harvey, and I've got crazy stories from that. I covered the February 21 Texas freeze, and I've got wild stories from that of not sleeping. I slept 10 hours that week and not consecutively, right? Like it was a rough week. But I think my favorite weather story that I have, it's December. Christmas decorations are up again. I'm located where Texas A&M is, so it's final time, so all the students are still in College Station. And it was flurrying outside. And if you know Southeast Texas, you get any sort of white flake that falls from the sky and people panic. And so I wasn't supposed to be on most of the evening broadcasts because I was going to a local school to go read a book. It was like their reading night. But I was going to do weather live at 6 p.m. from the school. And so my news director is like, hey, man, like we need you on TV just to tell people like this is going to be okay. And I was like, cool. So looking at the Her model, it's painted blue. And I was like, oh, like this thing's way overdoing it. So I go on TV, I'm like, it's a couple flurries, like you'll be fine, like don't worry about it, like you'll see it, enjoy it, but like it's just flurries. So then I go 5 o'clock show, I drive to the school, we set up for the 6 p.m. show, standing in a hallway, and this kid runs in, he's like, hey, can we do this outside? It's snowing. And I was like, I want to be like, no kid, like it's just some flurries, like we can't. So I go through this forecast and like I'm holding a tablet, right? Because that's how you do it when you're live. And so I start with the Her, I go through this, I'm like, it's not going to stick, it's not going to accumulate, like, blah, blah, blah. And then we show this live camera from Madisonville, Texas. And I remember looking at it and in my head, I was like, man, the wind is really blowing those flurries. Like, it's just looking pretty rough out there. And I wrap up my forecast and I walk outside and it's just, think of like Steamboat, Colorado level snow. Like, dumping snow. And again, I'm cool, but in my head, like, I think of one of those 4-letter words you can't say on TV. I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I read to the kids and I race back to the station and all this ends in 3 hours time. We got, I think like 5 inches of snow, which is one of the
Serious?
top biggest
So
snows.
wait, I gotta ask you, in that moment, like, how did you feel in that moment? Because I mean, you love extreme weather. There's this unusual snow event, but then it's not what was forecasted. I mean, just what was going through your mind at that moment?
Well, one, I still have to reach to these kids, but I should be back at the station and like Facebook living and stuff. I call my wife because it's a big deal. Like we were making chili, and like normally I make the chili, and then she was making it. And I was like, "Hey, I can't come home. I gotta go to work." And she's like, mad. I was like, "Have you been outside?" And same. She was like, "Yeah, like it's not a big deal." And then she called me back. She's like, "Oh yeah, you should go to work." And so yeah, the one of the biggest snow events. And the thing is about it, one, it was a great community engagement moment. Like we were like sending your pictures, and one of the doctors in town sent a picture of a snowman that they named Shel No Accumulation Winkley, right? Because everyone's watching, and I'm just sitting there saying like it's not going to stick, and they're looking out their window and like, what's he talking about? Like it's sticking on the ground. And it was just magical because again, there's Christmas lights. You could walk outside and you could feel the buzz of the excitement in town. Like everybody was outside of this thing. And I think if it was the opposite way around, if I had forecasted 5 inches of snow and it didn't happen, how sad would people be? And when we looked back at the event, I tell you, if I had the exact same setup today, I would not forecast snow. But essentially what happened is like, the cold front came through, but then the upper level front came and it just hit this convective band. And it just dumped snow. So it was really cool that one, I got to eat crow on that, but people were really nice about it. Like it was a fun moment and I leaned into it. Two, the next day I got to like do nerdy things, like show a sounding on TV and explain how when I tell you the lower level column was just so dry that the fact that we were able to saturate it and get those snowflakes blows my mind to this day. But I was able to like use a sounding on TV and explain it. And then the way it all ties up is that we ran this story about like Santa Claus visiting the mall. And I was like, well, that's the reason. I was like, no one told me Santa was in town. I would have forecasted snow if you had told me the jolly old elf was coming. That's probably my most memorable and favorite weather event. I've covered a lot of severe weather. We've covered some devastating storms. But man, that one's just always going to like be in my heart.
Shel, I love that story so much for like 3 reasons. Number one, it shows us weather can even surprise the best forecasters, right? There's always something out there that can surprise us. But number two, I love how you're humble enough to share, like, this is a time when I guess you'd say you blew the forecast, but you made the most of it. You engaged with the community, and you also saw, you know what, like for the most part, it sounds like people were outside playing in the snow. They were enjoying it. They were having a great time. And like you said, it's better to miss on that end. But I love too how you engage people afterwards to say, this is why we forecasted what we forecasted. Like you made the most of that instead of getting angry or upset or feeling, like your pride was hurt or whatever. I love how you engage with the folks and just like you said, if you saw the same forecast today, you might make a similar forecast. But I love how you made the most out of that.
People want, so like, that's the way I look at it, especially weather broadcasts today. Like you can get the weather literally anywhere, right? Especially your phone, your watch. The reason people are coming to you now is like, because they want to know the why. They want to know the nuts and bolts, and people are curious. And so if you can explain why something like that happened or didn't happen, people are interested, and they're more willing to be forgiving because they know that it's not always going to hit exactly right. Yeah.
Well, you're touching on that curiosity in every person, even if they don't have a science background. If you can explain in simple terms, this is what was going on, most people are curious. They want to know. Shel, fascinating story. I love that. Was one of my favorite Weathered Wisdom segments we've ever done. And like, I've lived now for 17 years in Southeast Texas and South Louisiana. And I know when it snows, it's so rare. People freak out. They love it. I could just picture the scene there that you were describing. Shel, back to some of the questions we're talking about, your work as a climate communicator. I wanted to ask you, what do you think the future of weather and climate messaging is like as we move ahead, say in the next 10 to 15 years? What does the future of weather and climate messaging look like?
Yeah, so first of all, it's going to be harder, and that's not just special to weather and climate. The way that we get our information these days is a little broken. It's called I've heard it called a broken shard of glass media, right? So you're getting, instead of sitting down to appointment television where you sit down to get the news of the day, the weather of the day, you've got it constantly coming at you all day long, and you're only getting little bits and pieces in these very short amounts. So what we really need to work on is, one, we know that people aren't paying attention like they used to, right? You got a thunderstorm happening outside, but you're watching something on Netflix or Disney or whatever it might be. you don't have that little icon on the top of your screen anymore to say tornado warning. You have to really find a way to like get people's attention. And we have to find a way to get quality information and trust of those messengers. Like we have to be able to build the trust back with people, have them find that trusted source that they want to go to. And then we talked about this earlier, but meet them where they are. We know that eyeballs aren't on TV anymore. We know that eyeballs are more on like small screens and different screens. So we really have to understand where people are consuming their information, and we need to meet them where they are. And again, that comes down to one thing that will never go away is that last mile of communication. Those relationships between the National Weather Service and cities, the relationship between cities and the people that live in those cities. How do we get that last little piece to help people understand what's coming, what's happening, and then that they can make the best decisions for themselves and their families?
Yeah, Shel, I think that's amazing. And what I'm really getting from you in this podcast is that beyond just making an accurate forecast or having an accurate climate analysis is taking that last mile, that you're actually connecting with the people and reaching them. Like you said, they're on these different, all these dispersed platforms, and they're on Netflix. They're not on cable TV where you can run that warning. So it's a matter, it sounds like almost of finding the people and then making sure that your message reaches them.
That, and again, we get bombarded with so much. This was talked about again, not to go back and harp on it too much, but the Texas floods. I mean, how many notifications by the end of this podcast will be racked up and just lined up on your phone waiting for you, right? So we've got to figure out how to cut through the noise so that people aren't just swiping away. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in a restaurant and one of the wireless alerts have come through I was in Austin one time, second story restaurant, and tornado warning, downtown Austin. People just hit okay and just kept on eating, right? Like we've got to really figure out how to cut through the distractions that will only continue to grow, and get that important information to people. And and
I think some of that, Shel, may relate to what you said about finding that trusted source, right? This isn't just a random notification. This is coming from my favorite trusted local meteorologist or whoever, that if they say it's a big deal, it's probably a big deal, right?
Yeah. I mean, look at the people who come to you for information, right? So like know that you're a reputable, smart person who, when you're putting out information, it's not going to be fear mongering. It's going to be solid information that you need. But two, part of the reason that they listen to you, Hal, is because they like you as a human being, as a character that is in their life, right? Same for broadcast Mets, same for any content creator that's out there. So a lot of it is the trusted knowledge, but a lot of it too is just the people that resonate the most with you and that you want to listen to. And so we really have to figure out how to harness that all together.
Shel, this was just such an insightful conversation. I could go on for hours with you with this. This is all so applicable. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the podcast. This is going to be a fan favorite, I know, with our audience. As we close out this episode of the podcast, what's one last take-home message you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, so I think, a lot of times when we talk about climate change, it always ends with people asking, what do we do? Like, what can I do? Is there anything I can do? Are we cooked, as the kids would say? And I always tell them the first solution to anything, but especially when it comes to climate change, is communication. Communication is a solution. Conversation is a solution. What we are doing today is a start of a solution, because someone will listen to this and then maybe apply that and start with their city street, start with their neighbors, their family, right? So anything in life, but especially around this topic, is that just talk to each other. Listen to each other is the big part. But yeah, communication is the key to me.
I love that perspective that when you're communicating, you are doing something. Sometimes we think you have to have plywood or new shingles or, some project, hands and, boards and nails. It sounds like you're saying even starting communicating, that's the first step.
Yeah, be like those dudes that just go and sit and have coffee every morning, right? Like that. Find your posse, go talk to strangers. I love a good bar that I can pull a pint and start talking to somebody. So whatever that community may look like for you, just remember to put the phone down and talk to somebody in 3D every now and again.
Well, Shel, hopefully we won't see terrible extreme weather events or too much, influence from climate change in the near future. But I know if we do, you and your team are doing a fantastic job of not only doing the analysis, but like you said, communicating with people so they know how this impacts them and how they can prepare. Shel, thank you so much for taking time to come in the GeoTrek podcast.
I appreciate the conversation.
Thanks so much, Shel, for taking time to come on the podcast. One of the big take-home messages I got from this conversation with Shel is the importance of really engaging in an authentic way with our audiences. Part of that starts out by being likable and relatable. I mean, Shel is very easy to like, and even if he had a message you didn't fully agree with, you'd be like, well, I want to engage with this guy on this because I like engaging with him. He's very down to earth. He's communicating with his audience. But what I really got from this conversation with him is the importance of knowing your audience and adjusting your message based on what your audience needs. I think that's so important. Nowadays, in whatever topic we're talking about, social media is flooded by people just sending out tremendous amounts of information, and a lot of it's not very engaging. If you know your audience and you're adjusting your message to meet their needs, you're going to get a lot more engagement and make a lot more headway and do a lot more good in the world. And I see that's what Shel and his team at Climate Central are doing. So Shel, again, thank you for the lesson for us. I think this is a lesson we can all apply to our communication in whatever field we're in. Hey, special thanks to you for making the GeoTrek podcast one of the top podcasts on natural disasters. Our faithful followers continue to follow our content, engage with us on their favorite podcast platform or on our YouTube as well. Thank you so much for your support in making us a top natural disaster podcast. I wanted to also thank CNC Catastrophe and National Claims. They're the parent company behind all the magic here at the GeoTrek podcast. And of course, Blue Leopard Agency doing all the amazing work to promote this, market it, and even do the recording and the audio and video magic behind the GeoTrek podcast. Thanks again for listening. I'm your host, Hurricane Hal, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the GeoTrek podcast.